I'm Nora Whitman, 35 years old, and last week I stood at my father's funeral, uninvited, unnamed, and completely erased from the program. Not a single chair left for me, not even a line that said I existed. My brother, Spencer, stood front and center, acting like the legacy was his alone. But then, a voice cut through the ceremony. Lieutenant Commander Nora Whitman, present. That was the moment everything changed. Because what they didn't know was that my father had left something behind. Something locked away, something that proved I was never supposed to be written out. And when I found it, the truth hit harder than any military order ever had. Before I dive into what happened next, let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever been pushed aside by your own family, hit like and subscribe, because this story is for you. No one looked at me when I arrived. That was the point. No turning heads, no sudden pauses, no whispered recognition. I stood at the far end of the gravel path, the worn heels of my boots pressing into loose stone, a cold wind slicing past the edges of my coat. I didn't move. I didn't speak. The rustle of leaves barely disturbed the heavy stillness around me. It wasn't just quiet. It was ceremonial silence, the kind you feel in your teeth and behind your eyes, the kind that makes sound itself feel intrusive. The memorial site stretched out before me in white precision, headstones in symmetrical rows, trimmed grass between them like military discipline preserved in nature. Each grave was marked by name, rank, dates, beginnings, and ends, but no middles. A canopy had been set up in the center, black cloth stretched taut above the casket that lay beneath it, draped in a flag folded with painful neatness. The chairs arranged beneath that canopy were all full. Every one of them occupied, not a single one left open. Not for me. I could see the shape of them clearly. My family. Spencer stood front left, posture perfect, navy suit tailored and crisp. His left hand rested on the small of my mother's back, a performative gesture of support he had perfected in countless campaign photos. His face was composed, eyes forward, not twitching toward the gathered crowd or flinching at the solemn words being read. He stood like he belonged there, like he owned the grief, like the silence was his. My mother, Carol, wore slate gray instead of black. The pearls at her throat glistened like polished bullets. Her hair was pinned tight, her spine held straighter than the row of Marines behind the casket. Her arms crossed just below her chest, a posture that screamed restraint. When her eyes flicked in my direction, she didn't flinch, she didn't soften, just a bare mechanical nod. Nod of welcome, of acknowledgement, the kind you give to a stranger who once knew your name. Lena was harder to read. She sat in the second row, hands curled around the funeral program. She didn't move much, but I saw her fingers trembling just slightly. Her eyes met mine for half a second, too brief to mean anything, too long to mean nothing. I thought I saw something flicker in them, hesitation, guilt, maybe even fear, but she blinked it away before I could name it. The corners of her mouth didn't lift. She gripped the paper tighter, her knuckles whitening around the words, "In loving memory of General Harold Whitman, beloved father of Spencer and Lena." I scanned it twice. No mention of me. Not a blank line. Not an ellipsis. Not even an "also survived by." Nothing. My name wasn't forgotten. It had been erased. Deleted cleanly, deliberately. The ink on that paper hit harder than any slap could have. I stayed where I was for several long minutes, letting the weight of omission settle into my lungs. I didn't cry. I didn't breathe deeply. I simply watched the ceremony unfold like I was a stranger who wandered into the wrong ritual. I let the cold air scrape against my throat, let it remind me that I was still here, still made of blood and bone, even if no one else acknowledged it. Then I moved. One foot forward, then the other, not fast, not hesitant either, just enough to make gravel shift underfoot, just enough to disturb the sacred silence they had curated so carefully. A woman in a dark pantsuit, part of the event coordination team, turned her head. Her eyes narrowed, uncertain. She leaned over to a man beside her and whispered something. He stood immediately and began walking toward me. "Excuse me," he said, voice low, too polite. "Family seating is reserved. We may need to ask." He didn't finish the sentence, because that's when the voice rang out. "Lieutenant Commander Nora Whitman, present." It wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. The sound sliced through the gathering like a saber. I turned toward it, already knowing who I would see. Joelle Knox. Her dress blues were pristine, every metal gleaming like judgment. She stood just behind the last row of chairs, back straight, chin slightly lifted, the full force of military bearing in a single still form. The crowd turned to her as if pulled by gravity. The officiant paused mid-sentence. A wind moved through the canopy, and one of the flags stuttered on its pole. Even the honor guard froze mid-salute. Joelle didn't move. She didn't need to. Her voice had already done what needed doing. It called me into existence in a space that tried so hard to pretend I had disappeared. Spencer's face twitched, just barely. His fingers recoiled slightly from my mother's back. Carol went rigid beside him, her chin tilting ever so slightly, but she didn't turn around. Lena's eyes widened, mouth parted in the shape of something she wanted to say, but didn't. No one spoke. No one told Joelle to sit down, because none of them could argue with the truth. I was alive, and I was here. I walked forward slowly. I didn't march. This wasn't a parade. This was a reckoning. My presence wasn't for ceremony. It was a correction. Each step I took carved its own paragraph into the eulogy they tried to write without me. I passed row after row of still faces, shoulders stiff with tension, eyes flicking toward me in disbelief. When I reached Joelle, she gave the faintest nod. Not of emotion, of acknowledgement. The same way we had greeted each other before every deployment, every operation, every moment when protocol outweighed sentiment. I stepped past her, past Lena, whose breath caught in her throat, past Spencer, who now looked like he'd bitten something sour, past Carol, who still wouldn't turn to look at me. I moved all the way to the casket. And there, finally, I stood still again. The flag was folded too perfectly to touch. The bronze plaque beneath it glinted faintly in the morning light. I stared at my father's name, the man who taught me how to polish boots until I could see my own reflection in them. The man who told me courage wasn't loud. It was the refusal to be erased. 10 years ago, they wrote me out of the story. Today, I walked back into it, and no one could pretend they hadn't seen me. When the ceremony ended, I didn't wait for anyone. I didn't speak to Joelle. I didn't watch them lower the casket. I turned and walked away before the final prayer finished echoing under the canopy. No cameras followed me. No family called after me. I moved alone, like always. But now, they saw me do it. The estate hadn't changed, not in the ways that mattered. The marble floors still gleamed like polished silence. The portraits still hung over the hallway like judges with frozen faces. Eyes cast downward, unmoved. The air smelled of mahogany, dust, and something older, history or denial. I couldn't tell which. Even the light seemed staged, cold, controlled. I didn't have a key. I didn't need one. Lena had slipped it into my palm before vanishing into the post-funeral hush. No words, just the smallest of glances. A hand that trembled more than I expected. She hadn't chosen a side, but she'd cracked a door. That was enough. Her voice still echoed faintly in my head. Check the drawer beneath the medals, he wrote. A lot. I hadn't asked what she meant. I was afraid if I did, she'd change her mind and take the key back. The study was untouched. It looked the way memory preserves things. Too clean, too still. Like a set built for a man who never actually lived in it. Commendations lined the wall in perfect symmetry. A Navy flag stood behind the oak desk, and his old uniform, still in plastic, hung behind the door like it was waiting for a body to reanimate it. I stood for a long moment just inside the doorway. My feet didn't want to cross the threshold, not because of grief, but because this room had been sacred once. Now it was just a tomb made of paper and mahogany. I moved slowly, my fingertips trailing over the lamp. The crystal decanter that was always full but never touched. The brass corner of his blotter pad. Every item was arranged with the same discipline he had drilled into us as children. Even in death, my father still believed in order. The drawer beneath the medals was locked. Of course it was. But the second key on Lena's ring slid in smoothly, clicked open with a sound like a sigh. Inside, letters, dozens, stacked in exact columns, bound in dark navy ribbon. Each envelope bore my name in his handwriting, block letters, steady and unmistakable. My throat tightened, not from shock, from familiarity. I didn't touch them right away, I just stared. There were no stamps, no return addresses, no indication they'd ever been meant for the world outside this drawer. Just Nora in thick black ink, again and again, over a span of years. 2012, 2015, 2018, even one dated just months before he died. I picked the one at the top of the stack, March 8th, 2013. I opened it slowly, afraid the ink would blur just by being seen. Nora, I know I shouldn't write. Your mother says it's a mistake. She says it'll make you soft in the field. I think she's wrong, but I'm still letting her win. Aren't I always? I saw the footage. That alley in Kabul. God, you moved like you belonged there, like the dust knew you. I can't say I wasn't terrified, but I've never been more proud. You were born for this, even if we never knew how to say it out loud. Stay sharp, stay safe. I'm still watching. Dad, I read it 3 times before folding it back along the original crease. My fingers trembled, not from emotion, but from restraint. I pulled out another, then another, Warsaw, Jakarta, Istanbul. In every letter, he mentioned operations he should never have known about, details buried under classified layers, but he knew, he always knew, and he wrote, in secret, in silence. Each word felt like breath exhaled too late. I was halfway through a 2017 envelope when I heard the click behind me. The door opened without a knock. Carol stood there, her coat still draped over her shoulders like armor, her hands clasped in front of her, her expression carved from something older than stone. She looked at the open drawer, the stack of envelopes, the one still in my hands. Her gaze didn't flicker. He didn't want to weaken you, she said. My grip tightened. He didn't want to forget me either. That's not what I meant. I know what you meant. I looked at her then, really looked, not as the woman who knotted me out of her memories, but as someone who believed silence was strength and absence was discipline. You thought letters were a liability, that love would cost too much. You thought erasing me would protect the rest of you. She didn't flinch. You had your own path. You didn't need his approval. I didn't need it, I said, voice low, sharp. But I earned it. She didn't respond, didn't move. After a long moment, she turned and walked away, heels tapping like a metronome down the polished hall. No apology, no confession, just the sound of someone exiting a room the way they exit a life. I stood alone again, among the unopened letters, the evidence of a relationship that existed entirely in the shadows of ink and doubt. Beneath the last bundle, wrapped in parchment, was a heavier envelope. My breath caught when I saw the seal. Official, Navy. I slid it open carefully, heart already bracing. Inside, a command transfer authorization. Operation Redwind. To Lieutenant Commander Nora Whitman. Effective, August 29, 2020. Signed, Admiral Harold Whitman. And beneath that, another signature. Spencer Whitman, co-signing as secondary reviewer. But something was off. There was no processing stamp, no routing record, no indication it had entered the system. It had been written, it had been signed, but it had never left this drawer. Someone had buried it before it could be seen. The tablet on the desk blinked to life. A secure pop-up appeared on screen, encrypted. Incoming file from an old clearance ID I hadn't used in 3 years. I tapped the screen. Level 3 access reinstated. Redwind command files unlocked. I stared at the words, then at the document in my hand. Spencer had known, he had signed it, and someone had made damn sure the rest of the world never saw it. They hadn't just forgotten me, they had redacted me. I looked down at the letters, at the name written again and again on every envelope. They tried to remove me from the mission, but he didn't. And now, someone had just reactivated everything they tried to bury. Next, I would find out why. I didn't sleep. Not that night. Maybe not the next one either. The letters stayed in my peripheral vision even after I'd left the study. The steady, deliberate handwriting of a man who'd never wasted words, now bleeding across the inside of my head. My father had trusted me with command, signed it in ink, then placed it in a drawer. Spencer had co-signed, and someone had made sure none of it ever reached a database. If I'd still believed in coincidence, that belief had evaporated the moment the Navy's secure tablet recognized me. Joelle responded to my message with one word: come. She didn't need to explain where. A secure archive facility outside D.C., a place we'd both visited before, back when access had weight and our names hadn't been tampered with. I drove through the night, the road narrowing around me, trees blurring past like witnesses afraid to testify. I didn't bring a bag. I didn't need a weapon. Truth was the only thing I carried now, and it was heavier than any sidearm I'd ever strapped to my thigh. The building loomed behind a chain-link fence topped with dull spirals of barbed wire, half security, half performance. 2 guards scanned my credentials. Their eyes flicked to the screen, then to me, then back again. One of them flinched just slightly, like the name shouldn't have cleared, but it had. I walked through the gates without a word. Clearance has a memory even when people pretend they don't. Inside, the lights were sterile, government fluorescent, humming with that faint, low whine that drills straight into the back of your skull. Joelle was waiting near the secure console cluster, arms folded, expression locked somewhere between fury and control. She wore black, pressed and cold, like she'd come straight from a tribunal and never changed. "You're in the system again," she said, skipping the greetings. "Full level 3, Redwind unlocked." I didn't trigger it. She paused. But I saw the alert when it happened. We entered the archive vault together, the metal door hissing behind us like a breath being held. Rows of terminals lined the wall, screens idling with encrypted prompts. A single contractor hovered near the center console, nerves radiating off him like heat. Civilian, maybe early 40s, shirt too tight around the collar, tablet gripped like a shield. His badge read M. Kellner, and he looked like the kind of man who'd seen too much and spoken too little. "You're Nora Whitman," he said, not quite a question. I 6 months ago, your record was listed as..." "I know what it said," I cut in. "You're going to show me who changed it." He swallowed, nodding quickly. "We scrubbed the access trail when Redwind pinged your credentials back to active. There's an anomaly 6 months ago. Someone accessed your file, reflagged your clearance, and submitted a silent classification adjustment. Your file wasn't deleted, Commander. It was made invisible." "Reassigned?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "Technically, yes. Status code. Inactive, critical reassignment. That flag removes your name from all command rosters, all successor protocols, and all internal lookups unless you're authorized to override." "Which you weren't. Until now." Joelle leaned in, brow furrowed. "Who authorized the change?" The screen filled with code, timestamps, and log metadata. Each entry clicked into place like a ticking clock winding backwards toward betrayal. The final access row blinked in bold. User E. Pierce, date. March 9th, 2023. Action, metadata alteration, plus. Secure comms trigger. My mouth went dry. "Ethan Pierce?" I asked, voice more breath than sound. The contractor nodded. "That's him. Your former intelligence liaison under Redwind. He accessed your file remotely using a temporary elevated credential chain. Then he initiated a comms flag, which tripped a secondary alert, voice transcripts embedded. He tapped another panel. Audio logged during a private channel exchange. The room filled with a faint distortion, static laced with breath, then a voice. Lower than I remembered, but still unmistakably his. "She thinks she's on hold." That was the point. The less noise she makes, the fewer questions get asked. Let her stay quiet. Redwind survives that way. The recording stopped. I stared at the screen, my chest hollowed out. Ethan had been the only one in the field who never second-guessed me. Who pulled bodies from collapsed corridors because I told him we had time. Who wrote assessments that backed every call I made. I'd trusted him with lives. And now he'd sold silence in place of memory. Joelle's voice was a low current beside me. He wasn't speaking to himself. "No," I said. "That was routed internally. There's a second voice missing." The contractor pulled up routing traces. He didn't name them, but the exchange went through a private relay, logged locally under a multi-auth key. I cross-mapped the credential chain. "Look at the override." He enlarged the entry. "Override authorization .art07x. Authorized by Spencer Whitman." My throat clenched so tight I couldn't even curse. Spencer hadn't just signed my command letter. He had erased it, buried it, then ordered Ethan to cover the trail. And for 6 months, they'd let the silence hold, because they thought I wouldn't come back, because they assumed a dead file couldn't testify. I backed away from the console, palms slick. I could feel Joelle's eyes on me, steady, unflinching. She didn't speak, but the air between us was thick with understanding. They didn't forget me, I said finally. They removed me, intentionally, deliberately, with full coordination. Joelle's voice was steady as stone. You weren't erased, you were redacted. The word hit different now. Redacted wasn't absence. It was control. It was manipulation wearing a bureaucratic face. It was silence as strategy. Disappearance with a signature. I looked back at the blinking screen. My name, my file, back in circulation, but only because someone had pulled me up again, probably hoping I'd be grateful enough not to ask why it had taken 10 years. Why reinstate me now? I said aloud. What changed? Joelle's answer was immediate. Because they think you're still the same woman they pushed out. I turned toward her. They think I'm quiet. No, she said. They think you're still alone. I stared at the override line again. DR07X. Spencer's authorization. My brother's name glowing like a wound that never closed. I stepped back toward the console and placed both hands on its edge, steadying myself. Then let's find out what else he signed, I said. And who else helped him hold the pen? They'd taken 10 years to bury the truth. I'd take half that time to exhume every piece of it. I always thought betrayal would feel like a blade in the back. Sudden, hot, violent. But this was quieter, colder, like suffocation under layers of protocol. Like drowning in papers someone else signed. After the override log blinked Spencer's name on screen, I stopped hearing the faint hum of the server room. I couldn't feel the chill in the air or the low buzz of fluorescent lights. My vision narrowed to the words he'd left behind like fingerprints on a weapon. Override authorization, DR07X. And just beneath it, access, Tier 7 Redwind Succession Protocol. Joelle didn't speak. She stood beside me like an anchor in a storm, solid and silent, letting the weight of the revelation settle without trying to soften it. Kellner had already pulled up the archived document. The screen loaded with the familiar layout of internal Navy protocol. Black header, Navy SEAL, time-coded fields. The first line made my breath catch. Successor Transfer Contingency Plan, Redwind Tier 7 Clearance. The document was dated June 3, 2020, 2 months before my father died. My name appeared in bold. Vice Commander Nora Whitman, immediate successor upon commanding officer incapacitation. It should have triggered a chain reaction, a formal elevation, command handoff, high security clearance reauthorization. But none of it had happened, because just beneath the confirmation line, a smaller note had been inserted, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. Amendment pending DER review. 3 words, seemingly harmless, bureaucratic, but deadly in function. That line stopped everything cold, froze succession in place, and rerouted the directive into permanent administrative limbo. No rejection, no objection, just a perpetual pause. My fingers hovered above the console. Was this amendment officially reviewed? Kellner shook his head. No, ma'am. The log shows it was entered manually, tagged under low priority status, and filed away under non-urgent compliance review. It was never assigned, never activated. And who submitted the amendment? Joelle asked, already knowing the answer. Kellner hesitated, then pulled up the trace metadata. Initial submission came from DER support staff, but the terminal used to initiate the entry doesn't match any of their internal machines. It was logged through a linked consultant access badge routed through the civilian channel. Internal authentication shows DR07X again. Spencer, I said. My voice didn't shake, but something inside me did. My brother didn't contest my succession. He didn't fight it. He didn't argue it was invalid. He simply slowed it down, redirected it. He inserted a sentence that paralyzed my father's final command order and trusted that no one would question a delay. Joelle crossed her arms. He didn't kill the order, he killed the momentum. The screen flickered as Kellner pulled up the audit trail. There were 2 files, the original succession order with my name and the amended version. Both bore my father's signature. but only one had made it past the local server. The second had been flagged with an internal hold tag and never processed by Central Command. I stared at the dual headers. One said immediate authorization. The other said review pending. The difference was 21 letters. The impact was a decade. Was there any attempt to finalize the amended version after he died? I asked. Kellner scrolled further. There was a transfer inquiry issued post-mortem, 10 days after Admiral Whitman's death, flagged for legacy succession evaluation. But then it was closed. By who? He swallowed. By Office of Naval Oversight. Final review listed as not applicable, and the request was marked no further action required. Joelle's face tightened. No note, no review summary, no cause given. Just a clearance code, civilian interface authorization, contractor tier, that's it. I stepped back from the console, the air around me suddenly too sharp to inhale. The silence in the room wasn't empty. It was filled with everything that had never been said aloud. My father had died with the belief that he'd made his wishes known, that his last official act would protect what mattered most, and someone had looked at that document and decided to pause history. Because the alternative, putting me in command, threatened something they were willing to lie for. This was signed 2 months before he died, I said, and never told to anyone. Kellner offered a weak nod. Sir, yes. It was sealed in a Tier 7 loop. Normally, that would go straight to active orders on confirmation of death. But with the amendment in place, it stalled. He didn't override it, Joelle said beside me. He buried it in delay. That was Spencer's brilliance. His cruelty wasn't in confrontation. It was in erasure by paper trail, letting a system run like normal while quietly gutting its functionality behind the scenes. And the worst part? No one noticed. Or if they did, they didn't care enough to stop him. I stared at the name glowing in the override chain. DRS07X. The same tag that authorized my file's invisible reassignment. The same one that coordinated Ethan's voice, silenced in a back channel 6 months ago. It wasn't a coincidence. It was an operation. And it had a commander. I want the routing log from when the amendment was first filed, I said, already stepping away from the terminal. And I want everything that ever touched that file afterward. Print trail, internal memos, anything. I don't care how buried. Kellner hesitated. Commander Whitman, just so I understand, what exactly are you trying to prove? I turned slowly. My voice wasn't raised. It didn't need to be. That this wasn't a mistake, I said. It was a plan. As we stepped out of the vault, Joelle stayed silent until we hit the stairwell. The echo of our boots filled the space like a ticking clock no one could stop. Where do we go next? She asked. I didn't hesitate. Follow the money. Because you can edit files, you can hide signatures, you can reroute orders into dead ends. But money always leaves fingerprints. They wanted me buried under paperwork. I would bury them in evidence. Joelle and I left the secure facility before dawn. The air outside was razor sharp, biting through the layers of my coat like it had an opinion about what we'd uncovered. We didn't speak in the car. We didn't need to. Every click of the tires on wet pavement said what we were both thinking. Succession orders didn't vanish without help. And help like that didn't come cheap. If Spencer had manipulated a Tier 7 command freeze, he hadn't done it alone. And he sure as hell hadn't done it for free. By mid-morning, we were seated across from Marcus Lane, legal counsel for internal military investigations, and a man who had spent 20 years untangling the kinds of financial trails that only existed when power needed a place to hide. His office smelled like coffee and dusted leather, case files stacked neatly to the left, a Navy-issue service flag framed behind him. His reputation was earned, not inherited. He didn't ask why we were there. He just motioned toward the screen on his desk and got to work. Your name doesn't appear in any of the recent OCF audits, he said, without turning around. But that's not surprising. If someone rerouted your succession, they wouldn't put it under your name. They'd bury it under noise. He pulled up a list of funding requests, columns of numbers and acronyms, most of them dull unless you knew what to look for. Then he narrowed the date range. We're going to track fiscal anomalies from the month your file was altered. Let's see who needed money and who needed you gone. What he found shouldn't have surprised me, but it did. 12 days after Ethan Pierce accessed my personnel record, A transfer of $3 million was routed through a nonprofit called Reclaim Hope Initiative, on paper, a veteran housing foundation based out of Richmond. Lane dug deeper. The board was real. The mission was technically real. But the money didn't stop there. It was moved again within 72 hours, split between two separate shell corporations, both registered out of the British Virgin Islands. One of those shells was connected to a firm called Ellison Holdings, and Ellison Holdings, in turn, was linked to a consulting trust that managed military policy liaisons. Lane tapped the screen once, then again, and finally stopped on a name buried in the transfer log. Authorized consultant, S. Whitman. I stared at the name like it had grown fangs. He moved the money himself, I said. Direct approval. Under consulting cover, Lane replied, which allows him deniability. He's not listed as a recipient, just an authorizer. But if we cross-reference that with the nonprofit's board minutes. He opened a PDF. Meeting summary. Page 3. Special grant issued for Operation Transition Integrity. Recommended by S. Whitman. Approved unanimously. Funds released March 21st. That's the same week Ethan disappeared from his post, Joelle said quietly. I leaned forward, blood beginning to buzz. They didn't just hide me, they paid him to disappear too. Or to stay quiet, Lane added. That kind of money doesn't buy escape. It buys silence. I pushed back from the desk, pacing the length of the room, trying to outwalk the rage clawing up my throat. Spencer had used federal money, routed it through the skin of patriotism, then laundered it through veteran aid. And no one had questioned it, because no one had thought to connect the missing successor with the missing analyst. How did this pass an audit, I asked, trying to steady my breath. Because the audit wasn't looking for political suppression, Lane replied. They were looking for misappropriation, tax discrepancies, misuse of funds. You weren't even a variable. I stopped pacing. But I am now. Joelle glanced toward the window. Her voice dropped. What about internal compliance? If I trigger a level 4 inquiry, can we subpoena the shell transfers? You can, Lane said. But it won't be quiet. The moment you dig publicly, you'll spook everyone involved. The walls will close faster than you can get the truth out. I'm not ready to go public, I said. Not until I have more than money trails and a buried document. Lane gave me a look, not skeptical, respectful, like a man who knew how dangerous the truth was when handled correctly. Then I'll start pulling what I can, quietly, but you should know if this touches naval oversight. If someone higher up helped freeze your succession, it won't just be Spencer you're going after. I nodded once. Good. Then he won't have anyone left to hide behind. Joelle and I walked out without another word. The wind had picked up, snapping the collar of my coat against my jaw like a reprimand. But I welcomed it. The cold kept me sharp, focused. Every breath of winter air reminded me I wasn't invisible anymore. We walked a block in silence before Joelle turned to me. I tracked one of Ethan's last civilian transactions before he vanished. A debit hit at a cafe in Georgetown. They've got archived security footage. You want it? I didn't hesitate. Pull it. An hour later, we were in a borrowed surveillance van, parked 2 alleys over. Joelle keyed up the footage on the screen, blurry but serviceable. The cafe was half empty. Ethan sat near the window in civilian clothes, hunched, eyes darting toward the door every 30 seconds. Across from him, Spencer, wearing the same smug expression I remembered from every debate stage, every family photo where he stood centered like he'd earned the placement. The audio was faint, compressed, but enough. Spencer, she can't see this. If she does, medals won't matter. The narrative dies. Ethan didn't respond, just stared at the table like it might crack under the weight of what he knew. Then he stood, walked away, didn't look back. The screen froze. I stared at the image. 2 men, one manipulating, one disappearing. Joelle turned toward me. He didn't sign a non-disclosure. He just vanished. If we find him... I'm not just going to find him, I said, my voice low. Steel threaded through every word. I'm going to give him a reason to speak. Back in the quiet of my apartment, I opened my encrypted line, typed one sentence. Ethan, if you kept anything, now is the time. Then I waited, watching the cursor blink. 1, 2, 3. A reply came through less than a minute later. They're watching me. I still have everything. You'd better be ready. I was. Because if silence had a price, it was time they paid in full. The envelope was unmarked, worn soft at the corners, left under my door sometime after midnight. There was no knock, no call, just the faint rustle of movement, too cautious to be anything but deliberate. I found it on the floor as I returned from my fourth failed attempt at sleep, its weight too light for the dread it carried. Inside was a flash drive, matte black, scratched, and anonymous, except for the small folded scrap of paper wrapped around it. 5 words in Lena's handwriting. "He hid this for you." My throat tightened as I read them, once, then again, like I might misunderstand their implication if I looked long enough. I didn't call her, I didn't need to. If she had meant to talk, she wouldn't have left without waiting. That's how we communicated now, in absence and in the spaces between things unsaid. I powered up the air-gapped terminal I kept for things too dangerous for the cloud, and slid the USB into the port with the same care I used to unholster a weapon in hostile zones. The screen flickered once, then stabilized. No folders, no splash screen, just a single document nested alone, titled in all caps, Phase Transition, Plan E, Q4. I opened it and felt the shift instantly, like walking into a room mid-conversation and realizing every sentence was about you. This wasn't a report, it was a playbook, bullet-pointed, sanitized, vicious in its simplicity. It read like a military strategy, because that's what it was. The plan detailed a 5-phase protocol designed not to kill a person, but to erase their existence from a command structure. My name, reduced to initials NW, appeared again and again without context, stripped of title or recognition. The opening lines were surgical. Flag subject as behavioral risk. Remove from leadership flow. Reassign legacy narrative to alternate heir. Delay formal discharge. Withhold ceremonial rites. Each point colder than the last. It wasn't neglect. It wasn't even betrayal. It was choreography, political, precise, and practiced. By the 3rd page, it was clear this wasn't the Navy acting alone. It bore the fingerprints of strategic operations, specifically the Department of External Relations, DER. The language was sterilized but unmistakable. Reframe subject's trajectory as voluntary redirection. Employ familial optics. Ensure message control through authorized spokesperson. Beneath that were 2 signatures, S. Whitman and J. Kendrick. Joelle Kendrick, Spencer's former liaison during Red Wind. The same woman who'd delivered Spencer's public statements after our father's death. The same woman who'd once told me over whiskey that public memory is more about symmetry than truth. I hadn't understood it then, now I did. I scrolled down further and there it was, the part that made my blood go cold. A final directive typed in bold at the bottom of the document. Remove Nora Whitman from succession chain before Q4 initiation. The phrase hit like a command from a firing squad. There was no justification, no rationale, just the assumption that this deletion was necessary, inevitable, and most of all, executable without consequence. The metadata showed the file had been created at 11:14 a.m. on October 2nd, 2020, and last modified 23 minutes later. Final export authorization DR07X. I didn't need a decoder to know what that meant. Spencer. He hadn't just been a passive observer. He'd pulled the trigger. Joelle stood behind me, arms crossed, staring at the screen like it was a loaded minefield. She didn't say a word for a long time. When she finally did, her voice was flat. This isn't miscommunication, it's eradication. I nodded slowly, the weight in my chest no longer grief, but ignition. They didn't want me sidelined. They wanted me to vanish. She moved to her bag and pulled out a clean flash drive. Then we make it impossible to ignore you. All of this, Red Wind, the reassignments, Ethan's logs, we build a timeline. Cross-reference every decision point to this protocol. I took the drive and felt its weight like a verdict. The terminal buzzed. A message, encrypted. No subject, from an anonymous account, but the signature at the bottom was familiar. EP, Ethan. 1 line of text. Full archive attached. Every comm, every redirect. You'll know who buried it. I opened the compressed folder and saw the file names fly by. Command flowcharts, audit trails, voicemail logs, voice memos from 2011 to 2020. At the bottom of the list, one file caught my eye. WHTMAR transfer suppressed v. clog. A suppressed transfer order. I hadn't even known one existed. Joelle leaned in as I pressed play. My father's voice came through, shaky but firm. If this is ever questioned, she was always the rightful successor. My authority, my seal. Do not override this. The timestamp was 1 week before his stroke. The final frame showed his signature and the digital verification key. It was legitimate. It was binding. And they had buried it anyway. I sat back, breath caught halfway to anger. We bring this to the committee, I said. We go public. Joelle nodded, already texting someone from the oversight office. They won't like it, she said. They'll smear you. Try to reduce it to family drama. Then we give them something they can't reduce, I said. We give them a scandal so systemic it makes family drama look like the cover story it is. She paused before exiting. They think you're still on your heels. Still that girl from the family photo who vanished quietly. I stared at the folder on the screen, still open, still humming with truth. They're wrong, I said. I didn't vanish. I was studying their playbook. And now I was ready to burn it. The hearing room felt more like a trap than a tribunal. Long, lacquered panels gleaming beneath too many fluorescent lights, and rows of fixed stairs that didn't blink, didn't breathe, didn't dare move first. Cameras mounted in every corner blinked like red-eyed insects, unblinking witnesses to every inhale, every glance, every crack in the performance. I wore full-dress whites, medals realigned, bars restored. Not for spectacle, but for the simple fact that no one would ever accuse me of earning less than what was taken. Across from me sat the Oversight Committee, 12 officials whose expressions ranged from mildly interested to strategically indifferent. Senator LeClaire sat at the center like a hawk in still wind, his fingers folded over a notepad he never once looked down at. He didn't need to. His attention was surgical, aimed like a scalpel, and beside me, in the second chair, Joelle Reeve waited like a blade in a sheath. She wasn't here to speak unless I shattered. I didn't plan to shatter. They opened with procedural jargon, an hour of roll calls, motion approvals, exhibits submitted. My name wasn't spoken until 9:32 a.m. Sharp, when the clerk cleared his throat and said, "Now hearing testimony from Admiral Nora Whitman concerning procedural interference and unauthorized chain of command alterations within Operation Redwind." No applause, no pause, just transition. They didn't want performance, they wanted fracture. I stood slowly, letting the silence thicken around me, letting them hear the shift in my boots as I moved to the center table. I didn't glance at the cameras, I stared at the committee. Right at them. They wanted a moment to define me. I brought them a file instead. Joelle slid the flash drive across the table like it was a scalpel on a surgical tray. With the panel's permission, I said, "I'd like to begin with my father's last directive." LeClaire gestured, silent. The screen behind me lit up. My father's voice came through, low, resolute, unedited. If this is ever questioned, she was always the rightful successor. My authority, my seal. Do not override this. The timestamp burned beneath it. October 17th, 2020. Verified, notarized, and sealed with Department of Naval encryption. The room didn't gasp. It exhaled. Quiet, short, like they hadn't expected a first strike so clean. Then I spoke, voice steady. This command order was suppressed, not lost, not delayed. It was buried, manually, and with intent. I tapped the drive again. This file contains the full suppression trail, metadata, login records, access overrides. The name on each, DRO7X, Spencer Whitman. And there he was. Second row, right corner, hands folded like a preacher's. Spencer, clean cut, dark suit, no uniform, no apology. Just a well-rehearsed stillness that looked almost respectable if you didn't know where the blood was buried. Senator LeClaire turned to him. "Mr. Whitman, you've been named in this testimony. Do you wish to respond?" Spencer stood. He didn't blink. "With respect, this narrative is distorted. My sister's career was redirected for her safety, not erased. The burden of Redwind's collapse would have destroyed her had we not intervened." His voice was a study in restraint. Warm, polished, dead inside. I didn't smile. If you're going to call it a redirection, I said, at least admit you laid the roadblocks yourself. The screen shifted. Next up, audio logs from Ethan's secure archive. His voice cracked faintly over the feed. They pulled her file, reassigned her while telling the press she'd stepped down. Said she was unstable. Said a clean slate helped optics. Then, a memo signed by Joelle Kendrick confirming protocol phase transition. The bullet points lit up one by one like a funeral march. Psychologically destabilize. Restrict ceremonial contact. Delay family notification. Control narrative. Someone coughed. Someone whispered. Senator LeClaire held up a hand like a metronome, killing the noise. Mr. Whitman, he said, did you sign off on these? Spencer didn't flinch. I signed nothing illegal. But did you sign them? LeClaire repeated. Spencer's voice dropped. I acted in the Navy's best interest. That was when Joelle moved. Calm, deliberate, inserting one final file. Then explain this, she said. The third signature. The suppression directive filed under your private consultancy, Delcor Analytics. You rerouted funding through an external shell to execute an internal blackout. And just like that, the last mask cracked. His eyes flicked sideways. His fingers twitched. The predator sensed the walls were closing. I looked him dead in the eye and said, you built an entire system around the hope I'd stay silent. You forgot what happens when we speak in uniform. The silence that followed didn't tremble. It settled like weight. The hearing wasn't over, but something irreversible had just begun. The hearing ended, but the war after it didn't. They filed out in silence, suits and stars alike, each carrying their carefully constructed neutrality like armor. The press didn't ambush me on the steps. They didn't need to. My name was already burning through headlines before I crossed the rotunda. Admiral Whitman uncovers family cover-up. Spencer Whitman accused of chain sabotage. Operation Redwind, truth buried in bloodlines. I didn't read them. I didn't need their validation. I needed proof that the reckoning wasn't just noise. But even as I stepped into the sunlight, I felt the weight shift. Not like victory, more like consequence rearranging itself. Joelle walked beside me, quiet, but electric under the skin like a storm not yet named. They're going to come for you harder now, she said. Not as a warning, but a prediction. I nodded. Then let them come. But they better bring better lies than last time. We didn't speak after that. We didn't need to. We both knew the system never falls quietly. It folds, reshapes, pretends it was always built for accountability. Back at HQ, the air was sharp with sudden tension. Eyes followed me like I was the ghost they were warned would never return. Not everyone celebrated truth. Some had built careers on its absence. That night, I returned to the house, not to reminisce, not to mourn, to collect what still belonged to me. The door creaked like it remembered me reluctantly. Same polished wood, same curated silence. Except this time, I didn't move like a trespasser. I moved like the daughter who refused to vanish. Upstairs, in my father's old office, I found a sealed envelope behind the frame of his Naval Academy diploma. Inside, a handwritten note. Just 6 words. If they silence you, outlive them. It wasn't meant to be poetic. It was a blueprint. And it was mine now. I was halfway down the stairs when I saw her. My mother, Veronica Whitman, still wrapped in slate gray and control. She didn't look surprised to see me. You've made quite the spectacle, she said. Her voice didn't tremble. Truth tends to look that way after a decade of denial, I replied. She tilted her head, studying me like a fine crack on porcelain. You think you've won something. I met her gaze and held it. No, I just stopped letting you all pretend I never existed. A pause. Then, softer, almost too quiet. Your father tried to protect you. We all did. I laughed once, bitter, sharp. Then maybe next time, try doing it without erasing me from my own legacy. Outside, the wind had picked up. It carried the kind of chill that didn't belong to winter, but to memory. I stood on the front step and watched the lights flicker behind the curtains. They hadn't changed the locks. They just changed the story. And now I had the original draft. Back in the car, my secure line lit up. One message. Joelle. You need to see this. The attachment loaded slowly. A classified funding trail. An unregistered offshore account. Authorization code SW Logix. Spencer again. The timestamp? 1 week after my father died. The funds? Redirected from Red Wind's blackout budget to a private security firm in Belarus. I stared at the screen as the pieces realigned. This wasn't just sabotage. This was extraction. They didn't bury Red Wind because it failed. They buried it because it succeeded in ways someone wanted to disappear. And now, somewhere in a government archive or foreign vault, was a copy of the last clean file. A full mission log. If I wanted the truth in daylight, I needed that file. I looked out the window, the Capitol building shrinking in the distance. I hadn't climbed back to the top. I'd barely made it out of the silence alive. But now I had the map. And I wasn't walking anymore. I was hunting. The coordinates led to a black site that didn't officially exist. Just 3 letters buried in an outdated logistics file. VLK. I had Joelle trace it through old naval drop points and inactive sat feeds. Belarus, frozen countryside. Private compound with U.S. ties scrubbed so clean it might as well have never been touched by a flag. We moved quietly, no convoy, no orders filed. Just 2 people and a name that still triggered clearance doors. I wore the uniform. She carried the codes. If Spencer had stashed the truth here, I would rip it from the walls brick by brick. The facility was quiet. Too quiet in that military way that never meant safety. Just waiting. No guards, no heat. Just steel corridors that echoed back every breath like it didn't belong. We reached the vault in under 4 minutes. The biometric panel still lit green at my scan. Another trace of the past they couldn't fully erase. Inside were rows of servers. Old-world storage. Analog backups housed in climate-sealed drives. Joelle moved fast, fingers flying. He was here, she whispered, pulling up access logs. Last login, 6 months ago. He tried to wipe it, didn't finish. She tapped a final command. There's a local copy, last untouched in 2020. Want to open it? I didn't answer. I stepped forward and did it myself. The screen flared. A mission debrief loaded slowly, piece by piece. Red Wind's final operation. Real names, full audio, tactical overlays, civilian collateral misreported. Chain of command broken mid-action, and in the sign-off field, Captain Spencer Whitman. Override submitted without approval. My father's recommendation, ignored. The follow-up protocol, canceled. And in the metadata buried beneath all that, one recorded statement, encrypted, time-stamped 2 days before my reassignment. I opened it. My father's voice filled the space. Low, tired, resolute. If this doesn't reach her, it means they succeeded. But if it does, Natalie, you're in command. Not because you're my daughter, because you're the only one who still sees through the smoke. I didn't feel my knees buckle, but Joelle caught my arm like she expected it. We need to get this back to DC, she said, quiet. And we need to do it before they know we've got it. The facility lights flickered. Systems rebooting. I looked at her. They already know. We moved fast. No time to erase trails, only to leave decoys. By the time we reached the perimeter, the first black SUV had pulled up. No insignia, just cold windows and silence. Go left, I said. I'll draw them. Joelle grabbed my wrist. No, we don't split now. I met her eyes. They expect us to run. Let's give them the one thing they fear instead. I turned, stepped into the open, and raised the drive high enough for their cameras to see. I didn't flinch. Back on U.S. soil, the file hit the committee less than 12 hours later. But the damage wasn't just bureaucratic, it was seismic. Every press outlet with half a spine picked it up. Red Wind protocol fraud, confirmed. Admiral Whitman vindicated? But headlines meant nothing without consequence. I wasn't looking for a retraction. I wanted removal. Spencer went silent, his office dark, his social feeds wiped. The kind of vanishing act only powerful men try when they still think silence is strategy. But the truth was loud now, and it had my voice. The official summons came wrapped in urgency. Department of Defense, Oversight Committee, closed session. I didn't wait for the cameras this time. I went in full dress, file in hand. My father's voice clipped to the front page. Inside, the air was cold steel and expectation. Senator Harlan looked at me without blinking. Admiral Whitman, we received your evidence. But before we proceed, you need to hear something." He nodded to the aide beside him. A video loaded, security footage, a meeting room. Spencer, months ago, speaking to 3 contractors, his voice clear. "The minute she finds it, it's over, so we bury her before she gets the chance." I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just let it settle. Harlan leaned forward. "You were never just redacted. You were marked." I placed the drive on the table, then let the mark speak. And as the playback began, as my father's voice filled the chamber, the silence that followed wasn't doubt. It was defeat. The gavel cracked like a gunshot in a cathedral. The Oversight Committee reconvened for the final session, this time not behind closed doors, but beneath the eyes of the nation. C-SPAN, national networks, even international news outlets, broadcasted the feed in real time. The room was steel and glass and judgment. Rows of press badges flashed from the back wall. I stood alone at the front, full dress uniform, bars gleaming, drive in hand. No handler, no counsel, just the truth. They called it testimony, but it wasn't. It was a reckoning, and I was done asking for permission. Senator Harlan nodded from the bench. "Admiral Whitman, you may proceed." I stepped up, gaze steady. I was stripped of command without order, my clearance revoked without cause, my name erased from operations I bled for. Why? Because I wouldn't play loyal to a lie. Because I didn't fit their version of honor. I tapped the flash drive against the podium. Inside this are 2 decades of cover-ups, altered directives, financial fraud, a mission report rewritten to protect men too scared to own their mistakes, and my father's voice, still echoing, telling me to fight. Behind me, the screens lit up. Audio played. Richard Whitman's recorded voice spilled into the chamber, calm, measured, devastating. "Natalie is my successor. I've logged it formally. If they override this, you'll know they never cared about truth, only control." The room didn't breathe. The senators didn't blink. And then the final image loaded. A signed document, time-stamped, notarized. His original directive. My name printed cleanly below the title, Red Wind Command Transfer, Admiral Natalie Whitman. They called a recess after that, but no one left. No one spoke. Spencer wasn't present. He'd been detained hours earlier, quietly, federal marshals waiting at his summer home in Maine, charged with obstruction, unlawful reclassification, and conspiracy against a commanding officer. I didn't watch the arrest. I didn't need to. Men like him always think the silence will save them. But this time, the silence was mine, and I weaponized it. 2 weeks later, they held the reinstatement ceremony in the Navy's Hall of Valor. Polished oak, brass lighting, walls lined with photos of men who'd never had to fight to be remembered. Until today, they called my name, not Vice Admiral, not Survivor, just Admiral Whitman, without hesitation. As I stepped to the podium, the air shifted. Even the room knew what this meant. "This isn't a celebration," I said. "It's a correction. It's proof that truth doesn't decay. It waits, it roots, and eventually, it rises." The applause didn't roar. It rolled, like thunder crawling up from the earth, deep, certain, undeniable. Afterward, Joelle found me outside the chamber. She handed me a package. Inside, a bronze-framed photo of me and my father from the academy yard, taken before the war turned us into ghosts. Beside it, a slip of paper in his handwriting, torn from his journal. "You never needed a spotlight to lead, just a compass." I didn't cry, not then. But when I mounted that photo on the wall of my new office, front and center where no one could ever cut it out again, I felt the air shift. My story wasn't a comeback. It was the restoration of something never rightfully lost. A week later, I stepped into my first seminar back at the Naval War College. I faced a room full of cadets, all of them watching with the kind of attention I used to give to ghosts in textbooks. I wrote one word on the board: silence. "It can protect you," I said, "or it can erase you. Choose wisely who you're quiet for. Because someday, someone will weaponize your silence and call it protocol." One cadet raised her hand, voice trembling. "How did you know when to speak?" I paused. Then I smiled, when I realized they'd counted on me not to. As I left the hall, I passed a new plaque on the wall, my name etched below my father's. Not as daughter, not as footnote, as successor, as proof. As the one who stood long enough for the lies to fall. This wasn't vindication, it was confirmation. The silence didn't define me, speaking did. And now they have to listen.